Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to P&P Live. I'm Brad Graham, a co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Alyssa Muscatine. We have a great program for you this evening featuring an exciting new journal, Liberties, which calls itself a journal of culture and politics. A couple of brief housekeeping notes first, though. To post a question at any point during the discussion, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. And in the chat column, you'll find a link for purchasing copies of Liberties. Launched last fall, Liberties is published by a foundation here in DC that in its words is devoted to educating the public about the history, current trends, and possibilities of culture and politics. The inaugural edition of the journal, which comes out quarterly and is available in bookstores as well as online, said the publication would be aimed at what used to be called the common reader, who would rather reflect than belong and asks of our intellectual life more than a choice between orthodoxies. Each issue features a mix of essays and poetry from a range of writers, some prominent, others not, some from the United States, others from abroad. Here to talk about the journal are its two top editors, Leon Wieseltier and Celeste Marcus. And joining them as this evening's moderator is New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd. I'll say just a few words about each. Leon, who holds the title of editor at the journal, was a literary editor at the New Republic for many years, then served as a contributing editor at The Atlantic and was a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He's also published several books of fiction and nonfiction, among them Kaddish, about the Jewish prayers of mourning, Against Identity, a collection of aphorisms, and Nuclear War, Nuclear Peace. Celeste, who is the managing editor of Liberties, is a couple of years out of graduating from the University of Pennsylvania, where she founded and edited an intercollegiate journal of ideas and studied intellectual history. And Maureen is no doubt familiar to many, if not all of you, for her clever and cutting New York Times columns, which she's been writing since 1995. A Pulitzer Prize winner for her commentary, she's also the author of books on the presidencies of the two Bushes, the 2016 presidential race, and the conflict between the sexes. So Leon, Celeste, and Maureen, the screen is yours.
Okay, are you two ready?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, this question is for both of you, Leon and then Celeste. Why did you start Liberties? And by the way, where'd you get that fantastic name?
Well, the name originally, it's a tribute to, I had a good friend who was a columnist at the New York Times many years ago. I think it was during the Truman administration. And she had that as her name for her. And I emulate her always.
Well, Leon, that name was tough to come up with.
Well, yeah, I remember you found it on the highway in Delaware, right? Or something like that. It was road signage.
A rest stop. No.
Rest stop, right.
I was visiting Alessandra Stanley, a friend of mine, when she was the New York Times Rome bureau chief, and I got the column. And I, instead of vacationing in Rome, which was the intelligent thing to do, I took a dictionary and read every word in the dictionary.
Oh, well, it's just as well. I could have wound up calling it Havre de Grace or something.
Well, in the end, I think the inspiration was Calvin Trillin's Uncivil Liberties and then Liberties. But Liberties takes on a new meaning after the Trump era, I think.
Yes, the great thing about the word liberties, I see liberty, liberal, libertarian, liberation, and I love the plural of the word. Liberties for me is a very positive, future-oriented word, and it denotes all our rights and all our pleasures. and rights and pleasures are basically what a significant life consists in. And liberty singular seemed a little bit stodgy and grim, but and when we founded it, it's true that people thought that liberties were things that Trump takes. My view was that, like every other word he used, he just degraded that word too, and I was not prepared to surrender that word to him or to people who would abuse it. There are certain words in the language that get abused and degraded daily that I can't live without, like spiritual, right? There is no more abused word than that. I don't know another word that says what that does. And similarly with liberties. So that's why we chose the name.
And Celeste, you ran an ideas journal in college, and how did that prepare you for this?
Well, in many ways, I think probably the most direct way is that that's how I met Leon, because I founded the journal when I was a freshman, and I emailed like a whole bunch of public intellectuals and writers and professors who I thought would intimidate my writers into sending their pieces in on time. So I just like sent them all the mission statement, and one of them was Leon, and he said yes. So I had the opportunity to learn from him when I was still in college how to run a journal. And it prepared me in a lot of ways. I think that as COVID taught us, whenever you start something, you have no idea what the challenges are going to be, even if you plan for it for a year in advance or many years in advance. So I learned that with OR, which was the journal that I started in college. And we learned that again, in 2020 when we were just starting the journal, and the curtain fell over the entire world. We had to figure out how to do it online and in hard copy, just like remotely. So that was the beginning of that.
Yeah, was that crazy to be trying to put together this journal in COVID?
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I think what was strange there were so many things that were strange about that experience. One of them was that the entire world was transformed into this digital, very rapid pace, bizarre pitch. And Liberties' tone is so different from the tone of social media. So I think Bill, our wonderful publisher, and Leon and I were all doing this together. I was very much living two lives. One of them was online and one of them was in the office, and they were just completely different, even though the themes were the same. How they treated the themes were very different. So it was sort of like switching one part of my brain off when I went to the office and when I left.
It was a great privilege, Maureen, that during this unimmeasurably bleak time, we actually spent it building an institution. It was really extraordinary. We were lucky, there were only 3 of us in this beautiful little carriage house of an office. And so we didn't really have many epidemiological worries. And we were able to come to work. And we discovered when we approached writers from all over the world that they immediately understood what the objective of the journal was, and they kindled to it. And work started flowing in of a very high order. And while everything was shut down and there were plywood boards across shops and the streets were dark and people were masked up, we were able to come and, as they used to say in summer stock, put on a show. And it was really an extraordinary experience.
You guys are Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland.
She can be Judy Garland, but I will not be Mickey Rooney.
So, Tom Friedman had written about this journal that it landed on his desk like a bomb, and it, was the type of intellectual journal that didn't seem to exist. And do you think that's why you got flooded? Because we're in the world of Twitter where, people are only interested in whatever, 100 characters and, very short attention spans.
I think it was 2 things. Celeste, you don't mind if I take this one, do you? I mean,
I'll go next.
Okay. I think it was 2 things. First, it was on the one hand, the deranged velocity of social media and the extent to which Trump, who was responsible for 10 to 15 outrages a day, had everybody's brain completely addled. I mean, there was a kind of, there was a new metabolism in the American mind, and it was accelerated to a point of constant hysteria. Everybody was in a state of apocalyptic excitement all day long. As a consequence of that, the journalistic community covered Trump beautifully, I thought. And more generally, people responded to the outrages wittily and forcefully, sometimes in disgusting ways, but not always, on social media. But what seemed to me to have been left behind were non-responsive, reflective essays about larger questions in culture and politics that were being posed by the deranged time in which we lived. And so we decided that we would be countercultural. We would slow ourselves down. I mean, the only revolutionary act you can perform in today's world is to slow anything down. And so we decided we would slow that down and do the larger things, that no hot takes, no rapid responses, none of that. All that's covered. The other thing on the other side was that, I'll try to speak a little diplomatically here, the magazines that existed all in one way or another belonged to a gang. They were doctrinaire, some more than others. Some of the most popular ones were repulsively doctrinaire. And there was this, I began to hear years ago from writer friends, even about respectable magazines whose tote bags you see in all the streets, that they couldn't quite say what they wanted to say the way they wanted to say it, that they got 80% or 75% or 60% of what they wanted. And so I had this feeling that the world needed, for liberals, we can talk about what we mean by that, a place where people could give all their thoughts in all their words, that they could feel that they could speak in their own voice and there would not be political pressures. That was the other part of the situation.
And Celeste, you are actually on Twitter. So
Yeah.
you are part of that.
I'm the problem. No.
Yeah. How did you slow down?
Oh, I mean, I'm not very good at Twitter. I think that's the trick. I think I agree with, everything that Leon said. Yes, I agree with that. I think that I feel more compelled to see what it is that everybody is doing and talking about, even if I'm not talking about those things in the same way that they are. And I think I feel it very intensely. I feel that imperative very intensely in a way that I know Leon doesn't. Like if I come into the office and I'm, complaining to the two of them about what somebody said on Twitter, they don't get as exercised about it as I do, probably because they've been in this world longer than I have, and they know that human beings can be ridiculous about things like this, and people get things wrong. And I'm kind of learning that, as I go. Like I have to take the themes that are being discussed on Twitter all the time and elevate them. I hate seeing concepts or subjects or values that I revere degraded because they're not being treated with the respect or the time that I think they deserve. So I want to watch that happen and then try to correct for it. That's why I'm on Twitter. But I think also, sorry, go ahead.
No, also what?
I just want to say something about what Leon was saying before, which is the same thing he was saying, just phrased a little differently, just about how I think about it. And I know this from being on Twitter and like sort of watching the bullets fly back and forth. I think that a lot of what's happening is a lot of what's being written or generated right now is like article ammo. Like somebody says something and you want to have like a really quick response because you think what was said was absolutely wrong. And so you find the 500-word piece that explains why what that person said was wrong, and that's the end of that. And I think in some cases, article ammo is important because, you want to fight the good fight and defend the things that deserve to be defended. But as Leon said, if you're just tearing things down all the time, there's no opportunity for reflection and to build things up. So there's no philosophical framework that you have an opportunity to sort of think about and build and then defend. You're just yelling back and forth. So I think
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, when I started in journalism, when I was your age, counterintuitiveness was really prized and
Mhm.
going against the stream. And I don't think that's prized on Twitter, really.
correct.
You're not with the gang, you're out.
Yeah, actually,
Oh,
a friend of mine just put it to me like this. He was like, well, his mentor said to him, your job is not to be right. Basically, think about ideological warfare as a tug of war. And if I'm standing all the way on the most extreme point of of a rope, and the other people are standing all the way on the opposite extreme, my job isn't to be correct. It's to be as extreme as possible so that everybody in the middle gets pulled in my direction rather than the opposite direction, which is like such a sad sacrifice to make. So you can never your job is never to think what is correct here. It's just to think, how do I defend my team or my gang?
well,
Right.
Maureen, you remember Oscar Wilde's old injunction, nonconformists of the world unite. And that's what we have. This is one of the great ages of conformism, of conformity, certainly that I have lived through. It's all about everybody presenting themselves as a member of a group or a tribe or a party or yeah, it's
Yeah. Well, Leon, that is why you earned the sobriquet Oscar Wilder,
oh, I
because
did.
you're so witty.
Oh, well, thank you. I was afraid I earned it for another reason, but we're not going to talk about that.
And I've often said, if you join Twitter, you could dominate Twitter because you, like Oscar Wilde, have a lot of amazing aphorisms. And but you guys, I know this is I don't know if this was before your time, Celeste, but Leon used to allegedly say to his assistants, if he thought of an idea, take a tweet.
No, really?
He himself is not on Twitter.
Oh, I don't remember
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, we
But
don't.
Leon, unlike me, you like to mix it up. And unlike
Yeah.
me, you have these amazing aphorisms. So why wouldn't you be on Twitter?
I think Bill lives in fear of Leon being on Twitter.
I hate the coarseness and the speed and the emotionalism, the hysteria. I find the whole thing exhausting. My mind works more slowly. Many decades ago, someone we knew at the Washington Post offered me a weekly column, and I said, no, thank you. Because there are weeks in which I have 3 very fine ideas, and then there are weeks in which my mind is mayonnaise, and all I want to do is read and watch movies. So I become a devout enemy of speed. I really have, because everything has become so high functioning that people's lives are turning into. What did Atul Gawande? He did that book called The Checklist Manifesto, in which he suggested years ago that because the checklist works in the operating room, we should all have checklists. And I don't want to look back on a life that consisted of 3 billion tasks accomplished. And so I think that the mind doesn't work that way.
Also, it's hard to explore ideas at the Mean Girls table at the cafeteria. It's not.
There is that, but there's also another thing, which is you reach a point in your life when you feel like you don't need to keep up completely anymore. When you know that you've identified your worldview, your principles, which you can defend, and you've identified the subjects or the problems that you think are the primary ones in human life or human history. And you really, I remember I had this epiphanous moment 20 years ago. There used to be, do you remember Olson's Books and Records? Well, that used to be across from the old magazine's office. And I went in one day, and there for $159 was a boxed set of the complete works of a band I'd never heard of. And I panicked because I thought, oh my God, I missed all of it. And then I thought, Wieseltier, you can do one of 2 things. You can put down the $159 and get up to speed, or you can agree to have missed that band. And it was very exhilarating for me when I realized it would be fine not to have known them, that I have other things that were preoccupying me.
But weren't you the music critic for the Washingtonian?
I was the record critic for a while,
So
yes.
you kind of had to know them.
Yeah, but I didn't. Yeah, I guess you're saying that I was delinquent at my job. Yeah, I guess I was. I
think another thing about being on Twitter, one of the problems that I hope writers struggle with is that if the way that you think about the things you write about are framed by Twitter, your perspective narrows so much, and it becomes like you start writing about the things that you're supposed to be the one who shows other people how to think about in new ways, in the ways that everybody on social media is talking about them. Like, you can be thinking about, I don't know, something that, nobody on, let's just give an example of, like, I don't know, Romare. You can be thinking about Romare, and then you'll see how everybody on Twitter is like, what if they're discussing just a particular scene, and then that becomes the thing that you're going to think about and write about, rather than, I don't know, something that could have appealed to you on your own. I think it like dominates your thought in a way that's really difficult to get out of.
Well, I worry about it being an assignment editor for, news organizations. But anyway, oh, sorry.
Sorry, Bridget. The good news is that young writers, as well as established writers whom we approach to write full-fledged essays, and we publish long essays. I mean, our essays are from 4,000 to 10,000 words long. I mean, we're not, everybody seems relieved to be able to do that we've approached. And a lot of people, despite the ubiquity of Twitter, apparently still know how to do it. One of the objectives of Liberties is to keep those muscles in good condition so that people know how to write what used to be called essays. Essay, you remember the word essay was first degraded when our friend Bill Sapphire decided to name his column in your paper Essay. You remember? And it was 700 words long. And I thought, no way. But these are real, good old-fashioned essays.
And now we have guest essays at the New York Times.
Yes, which means guest 700-word things, yes.
And anyway, you guys started out old world, and you're still a little old world, but you have a beautiful digital site.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we're not Neanderthals. I mean, we're not Luddites.
So Leon, in your first essay in volume 1 called Steadying, which is brilliant, I encourage everyone to read it.
Thank you, dear.
You write glancingly about how Me Too had come also to my door with its lessons and its recklessness. Mm-hmm. So this journal was started after you lost another journal, and your personal life kind of went through upheaval. And without getting too personal, I just wonder if you can tell us a little bit what that odyssey was like.
Oh, come on, Maureen, we just met. I can't tell you.
No, we met in the 70s. I'm
yes,
sorry.
I know.
Yeah, I am very glad.
No, look, I did something 20 years ago now that I shouldn't have done. It was inappropriate. It wasn't heinous. I was called out for it. I went into exile. I apologized immediately, not in a 1,500-word apology detailing every extenuating circumstance. I just said I was sorry and that I respected the women that I worked with. I was treated unfairly. There was no due process of any kind anywhere. Once again, I learned that institutions are never to be trusted to do the right thing. Only people can be asked to do the right thing. Many of my friends stuck with me in ways that I will never forget. A few of them did not in ways that I will never forget. It was painful. It gave me an opportunity to reflect on this and on a great many things. It was also interesting to move from decades in the white hot center of things to the island of Elba. I mean, to exile. It's everybody like myself, should one day have a natural understanding of what it's like to be shunned or to be a pariah. It makes one smarter about life and its cruelty. It prepared me for to understand things that were coming. And then all of a sudden, the opportunity arose to publish a journal. And I came back from exile wiser, a little humbler, and proceeded to do what it is that I know how to do. I learned a great deal. I learned a great deal about men and women, about people, about institutions, about forgiveness, about tolerance and intolerance, about mob behavior, about the exquisite civilizational beauty of due process and how rare it is, about conformism and non-conformism. I learned a great deal about many things. Whereas I can't say I'm grateful for the experience, I'm not poorer for it. I'm not poorer for it.
Well, I have to say that I've read stories about people coming out of this last year, you know, in more amazing ways. And you guys came out with this critically acclaimed journal. And I'm only seem to be coming out with a renewed obsession with French fries. So you guys have produced an amazing
if you have 4,000 words on French fries in you, we'll take it.
All right, that's a deal. So Celeste, why did you include poetry in the journal?
Oh, it wasn't, I mean, none of us make unilateral decisions. So this is a decision that certainly Leon was going to have poetry in the journal. One of the reasons it's important to have poetry in the journal and important to have essays about art and culture generally is because we're trying to sort of put a compendium of what a thoughtful person should put aside time to think about if they're going to have a full life. And there are different kinds of wisdom that a thoughtful person needs to accrue in order, you know, to live responsibly. And poetry is one kind of wisdom that we think it's important for our readers to develop.
Life is a desert without poetry.
Yeah. My fantasy boyfriend is John Donne.
You know, if you read his biography, as I know you have, you'll find out that, how shall I put it? He crossed the line sometimes.
Yeah, I know Leon's a fan of his spiritual poetry, and I'm a fan of his erotic poetry, so he's pretty amazing. But Leon, you've always said that one of your favorite parts about your time as the New Republic culture czar was spotting and training young talent.
Yes.
And Celeste has a really arresting piece in the latest journal called 9 Little Girls, yes, about a horrific child abuse scandal at a boarding school for Native American children.
Which she discovered long before it started making the newspaper.
Right. And Sean McCreesh, who works with me at the Times, had a widely read piece in the first issue about growing up during the opioid crisis in the part of Pennsylvania that has now been made famous by HBO's Mayor of Easttown. And how and where are you finding young writers these days? And is it a challenge to get them to write for the journal?
In the first place, you know, I feel about this the way I feel about all the traditions that I have inherited. If you inherit a tradition and you contribute to it and you develop it, but you don't transmit it, you've betrayed the tradition. You have to have heirs. And even at the old magazine, I always used to think of, I always searched for heirs constantly. And finding one is one of the greatest joys of my life. It's really, it's a tingle of a feeling to feel that you've transmitted something that's really valuable. It is turning out to be, on the one hand, I'll put it this way, I thought it would be harder to find young writers than it is, meaning we have now found brilliant young writers through acquaintances, Celeste knew a young writer in California who actually in the current issue produced a piece that you'll love about women in American films in the 30s. And
I
how
do
their
love
lives-
it. And I wanted to ask you about it because we've talked about this so many times. Leon and I use Turner Classic Movies as a grieving process when we were taking care of our sick mothers. And, you know, Fred Astaire can pull you out of a depression faster than anyone. Literally, he did the depression if you're having a personal depression. And I love that piece, and I wanted you to talk about that.
Well, Celeste knows this woman, Claire Collier.
She wrote for the intercollegiate publication that I ran in college. That's how.
Oh, wow. So she's really young.
Really young. Yeah, she's our Clara Collier. She's a brilliant writer.
That's interesting that she knows so much about old movies, though.
Yeah, that's what we thought. Yeah.
Thoughtfulness doesn't skip generations. I think that everybody, I mean, the way that people talk about young people as if because we were born at the same time that, you know, the internet took over the planet, we're responsible for the pace of it. You know, every generation that has thoughtful people in it, every generation that has a person who would rather read a book than watch a movie, or watch, you know, television or whatever it is, they're weird no matter which generation they were born in. So it's not that crazy that young people are knowledgeable about these kinds of things or that they're hungry for the kind of thing that we put out, because they are, you know, they're the weirdos in their generation the same way that you guys were.
I mean, I should add that, you know, I was very fortunate when I was very young. I was given a break. People gave me a chance. And this is Commentary Magazine in 1973, which is a long time ago. And I remember as I was growing older thinking that when I have the reins, I'm going to return the favor. And I would also try to find as many young writers and, you know, in some way teach them what I know about certain subjects or about the mechanisms of controversy and debate and so on. But it matters. It's a very, very important to us here. It really is.
Well, you know, I have written about this over the decades, and I think that the whole culture was running on this idea, which I never understood, that young people didn't want anything to do with older people's ideas. And, you know, Hollywood, everything, TV was all running on the idea of what does a 15-year-old boy think, and he wouldn't want to know anything else. And at one point, on American Movie Classics, the other movie channel, they were using young people to introduce old movies as though young people couldn't enjoy them without another young person as a Sherpa.
Right.
You know, but I think in a way, Bernie Sanders kind of turned that upside down.
That's right. That's
you know,
right.
The culture experts were shocked that
generational identity is stupid.
Yeah,
because every generation contains every kind of individual.
Yes, I agree. It's stupid. Anyway, I loved her essay. And Leon, I wonder if you can tell us any impressions or thoughts you have about the new administration, Biden and politics at this moment. Do you think Trump will make a comeback and a crazy orange cloud?
Well, I have to say, I wake up every morning. Well, these days I wake up every morning and gratefully think two thoughts. One is that there is no such person in the world who can be addressed as the current President Trump, and that there is no such person in the world who can be addressed currently as Prime Minister Netanyahu. And so the first great thing about the Biden administration is that it's not the Trump administration. I think that the restoration of sanity, decency, reason, it's like finding oasis in a very cruel desert. And it really, you know, the 4 years of Trump it was a period of in which public affairs penetrated deep into the psyche of hundreds of millions of people. I mean, everybody was being frayed and living by their nerves and really astonishingly stupid and grotesque things were being said by people in power, and just the sheer relief. I'm not letting it go yet. I mean, I don't want it to leave me yet. I think I admire greatly Biden's attempt to go big in domestic policy. I think he's absolutely right. I think that, you know, I'm what used to be called a welfare state Cold War liberal. I believe in using American power abroad, and I believe in single payer health insurance. So I'm really delighted about his going big. On foreign policy, I think he's talking the talk, but not yet walking the walk. I like that he is emphasizing that modern contemporary history is now characterized by a struggle between Democrats and autocrats. I didn't expect that to be his mantra, but it is. And I like the fact that he has willingly inherited the one single thing that Donald Trump did right, though he did it wrongly, which was to adopt an adversarial attitude towards China. And I like that, and you will have noticed during the Trump years, the only good political news in those 4 years for me was that when Trump turned adversarial on China, the Democrats accepted it. Because everybody knows that the Obama years on China, as in other things, were a fool's paradise, and that we are getting attacked and rolled by China. We'll leave Russia aside for a second, every single day. So I'm waiting to see when the walk follows the talk. I think that what worries me the most is the utter collapse of the Republican Party, its dissolution into the cesspool that it's become. The Democrats are having a civil war, but that's both of them, even progressives, some of whom I cannot abide, all that is taking place loosely within the realm of reason. But the Republicans are not having a civil war. I would kill to see them have a civil war. They purge everybody who betrays us the slightest glimmer of reason. And without a Republican Party, without a rational party of principle, without a second party like that, our democracy cannot work. And so I hope that Biden can get accomplished as much as he possibly can. The midterms keep me awake at night. And even if Trump doesn't run in 24, the real issue is not Trump. You know, Trump was as much the effect as the cause. The real issue is the mainstreaming in our time of right-wing reactionary racist extremes that existed. But didn't have social media and didn't have the green light of a major party giving them permission, as it were, to enter the mainstream. And so the state of the union in that respect seems to me very weak, very volatile, very precarious. And the storm, you know, I think it's a miracle that Biden is the president. I think the country caught a break. It's a miracle that he got the nomination. It's a miracle that he won the election, even though one can explain it all in retrospect. But we finally caught a break. This has to last. It cannot just be a respite from all that reactionary ugliness. And that's what worries me.
Didn't you call him adorable? Or was that someone else?
Trump?
No, Biden.
Oh, look, I think Biden is, he's a man in full. His humanity is so moving to me. It really is. Even when I don't agree with him, there is something so human and therefore humane about Joe Biden. And it's such a relief. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, it's amazing he has come through as many tragedies as he has had without being too damaged to act. You know, I think that's what the Obama crowd thought, that he was just too wrapped up in these tragedies. But Biden has a certain constitution where he can use those to express empathy.
Well, you know, there is an old debate among philosophers whether you need suffering to have wisdom. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think it's pretty safe to say that it certainly can help. And there is a quality about Biden that is that he has a certain existential authority because of what he has endured. And it's very moving.
That's really well put. Celeste, you had a thought?
Yeah, I think that I think it is a miracle. I mean, we, thank God, whatever that means. But I also think that this is sort of what Leon was just saying. There's a kind of raw authenticity about Biden that I think people were really, really hungry for. And even Warren and Bernie, who I think do actually mean what they say, couldn't match that. And I definitely think the other candidates, it really felt like they were just reading platitudes. It felt like their campaigns were being directed by social media, and people don't like to be talked to that way. They don't want to be just treated like an algorithm. And Biden never did that. I mean, even as Leon said, even when you don't agree with him, you know that he really thinks the thing that he's saying and he really means it. And I think human beings are going to respond to that. They're just hungry for it, especially now, especially when it feels like human contact and human authenticity and vulnerability are so far away because of the pandemic and because Trump just made everything feel so unreal.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's funny because the young people around Obama didn't think Biden was cool enough or hip enough to really be Obama's successor. And they were like the cool kids in the White House cafeteria, and Biden was never invited to their table. So it's pretty amazing that the two guys running the world now are Biden and Bernie Sanders.
Well, what's interesting,
history can really shock you.
One of the lessons of the Obama years is that the primary value according to which an individual in a society should live is not coolness.
Right.
That there are more important things than coolness.
And you can't be cool if you're trying too hard to be cool anyway.
Also, coolness, and they're necessarily a minority. That's just our definition. You can't win on cool from just the cool vote.
That's a good point. Well, let's take some questions. Okay. So, Leon, what was it like to be in an episode of The Sopranos?
It put me in touch with pieces of myself that I didn't know exist.
And what was your line again?
I can't say that. It was very obscene.
Oh, right, because
I don't want to utter
my mom was watching, and I warned her, but she still got upset.
No, Politics and Prose is a family bookshop, and I don't want to have to utter the line, but it was like being in a candy store. It really was.
Why do you have this love of gangsters?
Partly because I grew up in Brooklyn, and I'm pretty convinced that on East 8th Street, when I was a child, one of our neighbors, who was a fine, upstanding Italian man, may have been tangentially mobbed up. Secondly, because they are a kind of mirror image of the American story. There is something about the gangster story. It's the immigrant story. It's the Horatio Alger story. It's the story of opportunity and freedom, but kind of perverted, slanted, depraved, so that it broaches. I mean, these people who are, very coarse people. I mean, we're talking about people who are, murderers and thieves. It's not, but their story, there's something about them that broaches fundamental questions. And that's, I think, why many people have always been.
Didn't you also love their language?
Oh, God, yes. I mean, well, I remember many years ago, your newspaper, that I don't know if they still have their printing press, there was Times Books, and they published the complete transcript of the Fed's tapes of John Gotti at the Ravenite Social Club, which was his court. And the book was 244 pages long. And I remember reading it and thinking, if they took the F word out of this book, it would be 122 pages long. And sometimes the obscenities are used so frequently that it's a miracle to me that they know what they're talking about. There was a book that once came out that I read gangster literature, as you know,
Yeah.
and somebody who worked years ago with, if you'll pardon the expression, Rudy Giuliani, when he went after the mob, wrote a memoir of that. And he talked about one wise guy who he flipped, and the guy went into the witness protection program, and he wanted to express his feeling of gratitude to his FBI handler, to his minder. And he said to him, he said, you know, after what you've done for me, if anything ever happens to me, I want you to be a ball bearing at my funeral. So, I mean, the charm is endless.
I love that. All right, let's see what else we have. Susan Lippman asked, what were the major failures of the Obama administration, do you think?
How much time do you have? I think that in foreign policy, Celeste, you don't mind if I go on about this, I hope.
Right.
I think that in foreign policy, Obama left the United States so much weaker than he found it. I think that his failure to honor his own red line in Syria told the world that it was springtime for Hitler's, and that the United States would no longer be an obstacle or an impediment to anything. I think that he opened a strategic vacuum in the Middle East that allowed Russia to reemerge against all odds and probabilities as not just a major regional power, but a major global power, which, given what we know about Russia, is insane. I think that Obama had an aversion to conflict in politics. I think that the only time he would roll up his sleeves and take a risk is when it came to getting himself elected. He punted on healthcare and gave it to Pelosi. It should be called Pelosi care. I think that his view was that the message of the Obama administration was Barack Obama himself, or as he once actually said, I think it was that genius Ben Rhodes who wrote this, "We are the people we have been waiting for." I mean, imagine saying that about yourself.
Yeah, I think that originally came from, I don't know what sage, but Maria Shriver said it earlier.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, Leon, this is a good question. You once wrote a media column for the old Vanity Fair, and your new journal has done some good media criticism. Right now, the American media has a lower favorability rating than Donald Trump. It didn't exactly heap itself in glory in the last 4 years. Are we just in another era of yellow journalism? How does the mainstream press course correct? Can it?
Oh, that's a very important and complicated question. This is what I think. I think that after the internet was invented, the mainstream media, the print media, the traditional media, call it what you want, began to believe the rumors of its own demise, and a shudder went through it. I mean, you see it at your paper, or at least I see it at your paper. And all of a sudden, everybody had to go around and, start stealing things that were working for the kids. That was the first thing that happened, that were digital. Secondly, I think that our media has been politicized in a way that it never was before. I really do think that whatever you can argue about how objective was the New York Times ever and so on, but there were aspirations to objectivity. There really were, and those aspirations were correct. Because if objectivity is no longer possible, as most of our culture seems to believe, then we are doomed in our politics and in our culture, because it means that we no longer can detach ourselves from ourselves, and that we no longer wish to detach ourselves from ourselves. All we wish to do is express ourselves as loudly as possible. So I think that this politicization, which is accompanied by a kind of emotionalism, by an emotionalization of the media, has been very bad for it. I never liked the argument that became prominent 25 years ago with the introduction of digital media, the argument against gatekeepers. You cannot accomplish anything without gatekeepers. The people who run digital websites are as much gatekeepers as I was when I ran my pages in the New Republic. And the biggest gatekeepers who ever lived are called Bezos and Zuckerberg and Gates. So basically, the media will only be as good as the people who run it. And because of the collapse of the economics of the industry, the people who run it will only be as good as the people who own it. Because we are now in a situation in which huge profits can almost no longer be made. And so we are in the hands we are hostage to the enlightenment or the lack thereof of the people who own our media outlets. This is what it used to be a long time ago. I think it is what it is now. The democratization of the media, I'm sorry if I'm going on the internet, has its ups and its downs. As always in the case of democratization, it led to a certain vulgarization. The nice thing is that nobody can any longer complain that they can't be heard, because there is this place called Medium, and if nobody will publish, you publish yourself. And we were a free country before, but now we're even a freer country, and that's a good thing. Nobody is being censored unless people who run media outlets choose to exclude points of view.
Celeste?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, yeah, all of that's true and it's bad. And and I think a lot of people know it. I think that we're already starting to see creative ways to counterbalance the mainstream drudgery. And I think one of the reasons why people are so frustrated by this is because it's really boring. It's just not as exciting as it would be if there was actually substantive and interesting. So one of the course corrections that we're seeing now is the Substack blooming everywhere. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's good that good writers have a place to publish. I think it's very hard for people who don't already have a really strong reputation to do that. I don't actually think there's any way for people who don't already have a reputation to have a Substack. And I also think one of the problems with that course correction is that they don't have editors, and it's not good for a writer to not have an editor. If you're just writing like a blog and you don't have another voice in your head pulling you in one direction, or somebody telling you how you could push yourself farther, you're just not going to be as good as you would be otherwise. And I think that's not good. I don't know if there's any way for mainstream publications that are really powerful to write themselves. I think that they would have to have somebody in a position of leadership grow a spine. And that doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon. I do think that there will be establishments of other institutions that will strive to sort of replace them or counterbalance them. And that's what we're doing. And so far, so good.
Celeste, do you think that the focus on Trump making a comeback is more some parts of the media wanting him to make a comeback because he's good for the media business in terms of stories and money? Or do you think that the media doesn't understand his base, and so he might make a comeback?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure that it's both of those things, and that one inflames the other. I don't think Trump's base disappeared. So I don't think it would be negligent of us to assume that, he didn't win and now he's gone. And as Leon said before, even if Trump doesn't run or doesn't win, he was symptomatic of a broader problem, and we do have to pay attention to that. It's true that the media had to write about Trump constantly for the past 4 years, and the way that they're covering him now is the same way that they were covering him before, or certain parts of the media were covering him before. I'm not sure, just because the problem is serious and you have to talk about it doesn't mean the way that you talk about it is necessarily correct. I don't know that we've properly understood Trump, despite having thousands of books written about him.
There was a certain pornographic dimension to the media's fascination with Trump. I mean, there was, just because Trump was tweeting all day does not mean that you needed 5 bylines to cover a tweet. I mean, a feature could have been established called Trump's Tweets, where everybody could go look at the idiocy. There was some way, and this has been true, as you know, Maureen, with Trump since New York from the very beginning, is that there has always been this weird pornographic fascination with Trump. and he designs himself for it. And whereas it's true that the media has to cover every single thing that the occupant of the White House says and does, because he or she is the single most powerful individual on earth, and we need to know everything about them. Still, there was something about the coverage of Trump that seemed inappropriately fascinated in some way.
It was so easy. They didn't have to, I mean,
That's
it just,
true.
it wrote itself.
That's
And that was really tempting. So
Well, he had a gift unseen in history for coming up with 100 stories a day.
yeah.
And you can't deny that gift. It's, you know, he thought Time magazine and print paper still mattered. And he was so crazy, he gave all this fodder, and that enriched reporters. They were getting TV contracts, they
That's
were
right.
getting, you know, cable book contracts, they were buying second homes. So when Trump says they would miss him, in a sense, they would, not as citizens maybe, but in terms of their bank accounts, yeah.
So I wouldn't impute to Trump any strategic or thoughtful intention to do this. I think what we saw was a sick man operating involuntarily according to the laws of his brain's derangement. I mean, this is simply who he is. I mean, that was the other thing about Trump. I mean, the substance of his administration was 98% his psychopathology.
the way that a writer writes about something inflammatory, the tone of their writing doesn't have to be set by the thing that is inflammatory. And I think too often that was the case. You know, you can write about something obscene in a wise way or a thoughtful way, or you could just spit back at it in exactly the same tone of voice in which it's spitting at you. And I think a lot of the writers didn't push themselves hard enough to kind of explain what it was that we were watching or offer a shift in tone.
I mean, reality television had softened the ground for Trump, for the coverage of Trump. Millions of Americans and media outlets had gotten used to the idea that gawking is one of the media's functions, and that gawking is a legitimate form of entertainment, and that gawking is a kind of acceptable cognitive condition. And it isn't, it's just gawking.
It's not leadership.
Yeah, and this is our final question. The hour's up, believe it or not. And this is for Leon from Kenneth. What do you make of the border crisis and Biden's handling of Iran?
Oh, I think I know which Kenneth this is. I think that I don't have a read on Biden and Iran. I think that partly as an instinctual recoil from Trump's policy on Iran, they are determined to go back into the deal. I don't see them rushing back into the deal. The election of this hardliner, who, as president, who is rumored even to be a possible successor to the supreme leader, might toughen their position. I hope it does. I think that one of the problems with the Iran deal under Obama was that it wasn't just about nuclear proliferation. It was an attempt to establish détente with Iran. I think that is both morally and strategically a colossal error. I hope that the Biden administration finds ways to deal not only with the question of Iran's nuclear capability, but with the even more pressing question of its regional imperialism. Iran now owns Syria and Lebanon and half of Iraq, and is in Yemen and in Gaza, and even has people in Managua and Caracas. And in God's name, what are they doing there? And while the left is worried about American imperialism, the Iranian, the Islamic Republic of Iran is busy making mischief across its region. I hope that Biden's a strange guy. Biden is a post-war American politician who remembers how much good American power has done abroad, who is also a post-Iraq politician, who was very opposed to the Iraq war, almost as enthusiastically as you were, Maureen. And
No, he voted for it, Leon.
I know, but he really, He's
So
part
he
of the
wasn't that opposed.
Okay, okay, well then he didn't mean it as far as I can tell. But in any case, I think that the question of him restoring America's position in the world, which is the most urgent question facing American foreign policy. I mean, you know, I'll finish with this. We are a famously polarized country. The one thing that we are not polarized about which there is near universal consensus in this beloved country of ours, is that the United States should not project force abroad or intervene anywhere or regard itself as a suitable candidate for world leadership. Everyone seems to agree about that. And that is a tragic historical mistake.
This sounds like it would be a good essay for a little journal called Liberties.
Well, actually, it's in the third issue. I think you'll find me ranting about this.
You can rant some more. All right. Thank you, Celeste. Thank you, Leon.
Thank you, Maureen.
Bradley. Thank you, Lisa, who I started with at the Washington Star. Thank you, Politics and Prose.
And thank all of you. You covered a lot of ground, and I'm sorry we have to call it quits. A great moderating, Maureen and Leon and Celeste. Here's to slowness and thoughtfulness and old-fashioned essay writing and nonconformity. Congratulations on the early success of Liberties. To everyone watching, thanks for tuning in. A reminder that in the chat column, you can find a link for purchasing copies of Liberties. From all of us here at Politics and Prose, stay well and well read.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you.